Welcome to the Fright Lab. I'm Lucas Yoakum. It is very unusual that I'm recording by myself, but it came to my attention last night that the horror author, Suzuki Koji, he is the author most responsible for the book Ring, or in Japanese, Ringu, that went on to inspire the film Ring, or Ringu, which would go on to inspire 2002's The Ring, directed by Gore Verbinski, which has pretty rapidly, I think, become a modern horror classic. And unsurprisingly, it's an excellent film, and it's very scary, and it's a lot of fun. But upon learning last night that Suzuki Koji had passed away, it came to my attention that I hadn't really paid attention to Ring, in a long time. I don't think I had watched it in a couple of years, and I decided today to go back and rewatch it. And in rewatching it, a few things kind of came to my attention that I don't know. I guess I hadn't thought about, or hadn't been quite so apparent or quite so obvious. It's unusual that I have to take a second to reflect on top of a film. So hear me out. Some thoughts about the importance of Ringu as a film. So it comes out in January 1998 and was directed by Nakata Hideo, based on a 1991 novel, as I said before, by Suzuki Koji. And it's just one of those rare, lightning in a bottle films. I remember seeing it for the first time, let's say maybe a year after I had seen The Ring by Verbinski. And I thought it was cool, but I don't think I got it, which is weird because it's fundamentally the same plot as The Ring, just in its original cultural context, maybe. So maybe just at the time I wasn't as aware of Japanese culture, or maybe, it just didn't hit right at that time. Again, it was maybe 04 or 05 when I watched that. I became very aware in re-watching it today that it actually is a pretty incredible film for a lot of reasons. What I didn't know until today also, and I just thought was interesting, apparently in 1995, there was a TV adaptation of the film directed by Takagawa Chisui, which had apparently was way closer to the tone of the original novel, though while the mainstream film released by Toho, it ended up being the more popular of the two. That TV adaptation is still floating around somewhere, along with Suzuki Koji's novel, which I really want to read. If you have a line, if anyone in the audience that is has a line on the original televised series, I would love to see it. I know that's a bit of a long shot, but, let us know. Reach out to us at thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com and title it Lucas Needs Better TV Access. So, with regards to Ringu as a film, it is one of those movies that I think gets a lot right in a very modern way, despite being, an older film now, a film that's, 20-ish years old, 20 or more years old. One of the things about it that first sticks out to me that people don't talk about with this film is that there's a weird kind of intimacy to the film. I suspect part of it has to do with the size of Japanese homes. The space where Japanese culture occurs is much smaller than most American homes. The average bedroom in Japan would be smaller than the office room I'm sitting in right now. And on top of that, I think there is a level of almost all of the characters, that are in this film know each other. There's a lot of family relationships that are kind of explored, and it leads to a certain intimacy. It leads to a certain closeness that's actually kind of hard to talk about. And in America, we make so much fuss about family matters and family importance, but we don't have that the way other cultures do. Family, I think, is way less important here than it is in parts of Asia, for instance. And that's not a better or worse thing. It's just an observation that our family associations are so much less important than they are in other parts of the world that I don't know that a direct one-to-one translation of Ringu into an American film would have worked. I think it had to have been adapted by Verbinski and company. Another thing that was really interesting to me about this movie that I hadn't really much considered is that at least in the first third of the film, there's a lot of discussion about urban legend. There's this story going around that you watch the video and then 7 days later you die. We all know the plot of The Ring and Ringu, so that's not surprising. But I feel like it got de-emphasized quite a bit with The Ring, and I I almost feel like urban legends, the sort of storytelling from kid to kid, from high school student to high school student, it mostly doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's so strange because I feel like urban legends were part of the stock and trade of my teenage years, 250 years ago in the 1990s. I always kind of harken back to the old thing that I'm sure some of you will remember, the fairly infamous urban legend about the equally infamous Marilyn Manson and his alleged removal of his lower ribs for a certain autofallacious act. But it is something that is so interesting that I wish they would have had more time to explore in the American adaptation. Not that they should have given the first full third of the movie to that, and they didn't really do that in Ringu either, but I don't know. I just wish they would have explored it more. There is another creative choice made in Ringu that I really like and I think is really interesting, and that decision is the use of sound and music. I feel like compared to other films, even films kind of roughly contemporaneous era-wise, Ringu doesn't use that much music. It's much more focused on diegetic sound, the sound that's actually occurring in the scene. And there is some music and there is some sound effects and sound development that's used, but it's not like other films from even that time period. There's less of a blaring soundtrack. There was going to be no original motion picture soundtrack tie-in with Ringu featuring the top rock artists of Japan at the time. It's just not that kind of movie. And I don't know that ever really caught on the same way in Japan that it did in America. But it is interesting because it gives you this kind of blank space to really experience the dread almost in a very, naturalized setting. It feels, maybe naturalized is the wrong word. You know what I mean? It's a very natural setting and it feels very intense that way. It makes it more real. And the music that's in there is pretty cool, but it's not the focal point of the scene. Without spoiling a already 20-some-odd-year-old movie too much, one of the things that I think is so incredibly scary about this movie, one of the reasons that it is so compelling, is that the film deals with a child with superpowers. There is something about a child with either dark powers or supernatural powers or whatever you want to call it, that is super effective and super scary. And especially the way it's shown in Ringu is that there's very little explanation. There's not a lot of conversation. There's maybe some kind of weird context hints about, there's just strange things going on the island and there's a strange fixation with the ocean and things like that. I don't know if that's just stuff that's kind of lost in translation or what, but I think it works really well. And I think that's really scary. Moreover, maybe the most iconic part of the whole series is the tape. You watch the video, 7 days later, you die. We did a whole episode a while back on cursed media, and I think it's still a pretty good episode. I think you guys should go check that out next. But it's not something that we see enough of. And the tape itself, the video in Ringu, is not nearly as overtly disturbing as the one in The Ring, but it's still very eerie and very effective and very weird. And I like it quite a bit. I do think that particular style, though, also the creepy art film vibe, ended up kind of infecting a lot of the way we interpret horror online. The idea of, cursed online videos or spooky stuff, quote unquote, from the dark web, which we all know is what it is, man. But I think that style owes itself quite a bit to Ringu and The Ring, and it doesn't get talked about enough. And that led me to kind of, I don't know, maybe my final thought on the subject, my final thought on that. We don't talk enough about how writers like Suzuki Koji or directors like Nakata Hideo, how they are, in a way, kind of the silent architects of modern horror. Not that all of modern horror movies are entirely indebted to Japanese horror or J-horror, as it gets commonly called, but there's such a necessity for J-horror to exist in order for modern horror to exist. I remember seeing Ju-On, which would have its American remake, The Grudge, which is also really good, I think. I don't like that people write that one off quite so much. It's good. But the whole Asian horror thing, the whole quote unquote extreme Asian or Asia extreme thing that happened in the early 2000s, those were the first movies that made me realize that horror could be more than just jump scares. They could be artful. They could be very strange. They could be more disturbing than scary. And I think the disturbing, scary thing is not something that I've made a distinction of enough. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But that movies could be just disturbing and unsettling and unpleasant without being just jump scares or, Jason Voorhees. Anyway, it's something that just doesn't get discussed enough. And it's something that I would love to see more of a discussion in the horror commentary world about. I wish we were dealing more with the fact that I think you can draw almost a straight line from a movie like Ringu to something like Hereditary, where there's this relatively extreme type of horror that's very different from anything that came before it. I think it's hard to map one-to-one, like, oh, Ringu and Ju-on are Japanese folk horror. Yeah, maybe. Or like Noroi, the Curse, has Japanese folk horror in it. But I don't think folk horror is a one-to-one thing for any real Japanese horror film, because I think folk horror is very European in its way, European and American. Again, another discussion for another time. But it's one that I think it's high time we have. And while it's incredibly sad to know that such a, little talked about legend in the form of Suzuki Koji has passed away, we do have the remnants of his work. We have the films based on his books. We have his books, which if anybody knows where I could get a copy of Ring, I'd like to know. I'd like to read it. I hear it's excellent. We need to be thinking about these hidden architects. We need to be talking about what these different horror directors and horror writers did that just don't get the same attention that other stuff should. Which is, of course, not to say that Ringu was ever unpopular. It was a massive hit, and it still carries, I think, a certain sinister weight and a certain sinister power that people need to re-explore. So, I'm going to end this here tonight. Typically, I end this, these episodes with, well, what do you think? Have you seen Ringu? Well, of course you've seen Ringu, but if you haven't seen Ringu, you're going to end this episode here in about 10 seconds, and you're going to go watch it right now. So, with that, The Fright Lab is written, researched by me, Lucas Yoakum. This episode was produced by the one and only Joseph Wren. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we will talk to you all again very soon.
That's Fright Lab for you.
No, seriously, go watch Ringu.